Don't close that gate. The woman's voice was barely louder than the wind. Ethan Walker stopped with one gloved hand on the stable latch. She stood on the other side, trembling so hard her shoulders shook beneath a thin brown dress, one hand gripping the cedar post as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. "Ma'am, you'll freeze out here. I only need the stable," she whispered. "Not your house." Ethan looked past her toward the empty road. No wagon, no horse, no footprints except hers, stretching back through the pale dust toward town. Then he noticed what she was holding against her chest, a small leather satchel, worn nearly white at the corners. Something inside it gave a faint metallic click when her hands shook. Ethan removed his heavy wool coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. She stiffened. "Why are you helping me?" He didn't answer. His eyes had settled on the satchel. A familiar brass clasp showed beneath her fingers, one he had not seen in 11 years. "Where did you get that?" he asked. Her face went still. Before she could answer, hoofbeats sounded beyond the ridge. 3 hours earlier, Ethan had been repairing the west fence alone. That was how most days passed at the Walker Ranch in the winter of 1887, quietly, usefully, and without anyone expecting conversation from him. At 36, Ethan had learned there were worse things than silence. A fence post did not ask why a man kept one bedroom closed. A horse did not wonder why he still set an old coffee cup on the shelf each morning and never used it. He drove the last nail into the cedar rail, tested it with his palm, and looked toward the farmhouse. Smoke rose in a narrow line from the chimney. One horse waited near the stable. One lamp would burn after dark. One plate would sit on the kitchen table. That was enough, or it had been for years. Ethan gathered his hammer and coil of wire as the sun lowered behind the cottonwoods. His bay gelding, Amos, lifted his head suddenly. "What is it?" Ethan asked. The horse stared toward the road. Ethan followed his gaze. At first he saw nothing but grass bending beneath the wind. Then a figure appeared near the far gate. A woman. She walked slowly, favoring her left foot, carrying no coat and no traveling trunk. By the time Ethan reached the stable yard, she had stopped outside the gate. She was perhaps 30, with chestnut hair coming loose beneath a faded bonnet and a face drained pale by cold and exhaustion. Her shoes were coated with road dust. "Town's for miles back," Ethan said. She nodded. "I know. You walk from there?" Another nod. Ethan glanced toward the road behind her. "Where's your wagon?" "There isn't one." She swayed slightly. Ethan opened the gate, but she did not step through. "I can pay for a corner of the stable," she said, reaching toward the satchel. "For tonight. Keep your money." Her hand stopped. Suspicion crossed her face so quickly another man might have missed it. Ethan did not. He knew the look of someone who had learned that favors often arrived carrying a price. So he stepped backward, leaving the gate open between them. "Stable's warm enough," he said. "Horse blankets are clean. You can decide about the house yourself." She studied him for several seconds. "You don't even know my name." Ethan picked up his hammer from the fence rail. "Figured you'd tell me if you wanted me to know." For the first time, something in her expression loosened. Not a smile. Not yet. But she entered the gate. Clara Bennett. Ethan Walker. Amos pushed his nose over the stall door as Clara approached, and she lifted a trembling hand to him. The gelding sniffed her fingers, then remained still beneath her touch. Ethan watched her shoulders lower half an inch. Animals sometimes accomplished what people could not. He turned toward the house. "I'll bring coffee, Mr. Walker." Ethan looked back. Clara had pulled the thin fabric tighter around herself, trying unsuccessfully to hide the shaking. "I said the stable is enough." Ethan looked at the falling sun, then at her bare wrists, red from the cold. He removed his coat. He did not ask permission this time. He crossed the yard, placed the heavy wool around her shoulders, and stepped away before she could mistake kindness for possession. Clara stared down at the coat. It nearly swallowed her. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. Ethan's answer died before reaching his mouth. Beneath the edge of her hand, the brass clasp on her satchel caught the last light of day. 11 years vanished in a heartbeat. He knew that clasp, knew the small crescent-shaped scratch beside it. His gaze rose slowly to Clara's face. "Where," he said quietly, "did you get that satchel?" Then, somewhere beyond the ridge, a horse began running toward the ranch. The hoofbeats grew louder. Clara's fingers closed around the leather satchel until her knuckles whitened. Ethan noticed. He noticed, too, the way she moved behind the stable gate instead of toward the house. "Are you expecting someone?" he asked. No, the answer came too quickly. Ethan looked toward the ridge. A rider appeared against the fading sky, coat snapping behind him. Clara took one step backward. Ethan said nothing. He simply moved between her and the road. The rider slowed near the ranch entrance. He was an older man with a gray beard and a deputy's badge pinned to his vest. "Walker." "Tom." Deputy Tom Mercer tipped his hat, then glanced toward Clara. "You see a woman walking this way from town?" Clara's breath caught. Ethan heard it. "Maybe," he said. Mercer frowned. "Stage driver found a carpetbag left at the depot. Woman named Bennett came in on the afternoon coach, then disappeared before anyone could return it." Clara's shoulders dropped. Not relief exactly, but something close. "That would be mine," she said quietly. Mercer looked past Ethan. "Ma'am, nobody's after you. Mr. Hale just didn't want your belongings stolen." Clara lowered her eyes. "There isn't much worth stealing." Mercer seemed to understand that he had stepped into something he did not need explained. "Bags with Mrs. Cooper at the boarding house. You can collect it tomorrow." He touched 2 fingers to his hat. "Evening." Ethan waited until the hoofbeats faded before turning back. Clara was still clutching the satchel. "You thought he came for you." Her eyes lifted sharply. "I didn't say that." "No." Ethan opened the stable door. "You didn't." He did not ask another question. That seemed to unsettle her more than questions would have. Inside, the stable held the deep warmth of horses and clean hay. Ethan lit a lantern and hung it from a beam. Gold light spread across the stalls. Clara stood near Amos while Ethan carried 2 folded blankets from the tack room. "There's a cot back here," he said. "Used it during foaling season. I can sleep on hay. Cot's already here." He placed the blankets on it and walked away. Clara watched him. "You always make it difficult for people to refuse you." "Usually I'm arguing with cattle." A small sound escaped her before she could stop it. Almost a laugh. Ethan pretended not to hear. 20 minutes later, he returned carrying coffee, bread, and a bowl of beef stew. Clara stared at the tray. "I said I could pay. And I said keep your money. I don't take charity." Ethan set the tray on an overturned feed crate. "Then don't." She frowned. "What does that mean?" "Tomorrow you can help me brush Amos. He hates me doing his left side." Clara looked at the gelding, who was peacefully chewing hay. "He doesn't look difficult. He's deceptive." This time the smile appeared. Small and unwilling, but real. Ethan turned away before she could become embarrassed by it. "Eat while it's warm." At the door, Clara called his name. He stopped. "Thank you." Ethan nodded once. "Lantern stays here tonight." "I don't need it." Wasn't asking. He stepped outside. Later, long after darkness settled over the ranch, Ethan returned to check the horses. Clara was asleep on the cot, still wearing his coat. The untouched, empty bowl sat beside her. Amos stood near the stall gate, as though keeping watch. Ethan reached for the lantern wick, then changed his mind. He left the flame low. As he turned, Clara shifted in her sleep, and the satchel slipped from beneath her hand. The brass clasp opened when it struck the floor. A folded piece of paper slid halfway out. Ethan froze. Written across its yellowed edge, in handwriting he would have recognized after 50 years instead of 11, were 3 words, for Ethan Walker. He stood there without moving. Clara stirred. Ethan bent down, pushed the letter gently back inside without opening it, and fastened the clasp. Whatever was in that satchel belonged to her until she chose otherwise. He placed it beside the cot and walked toward the door. Behind him came Clara's sleepy voice. "You saw it." Ethan stopped. Silence filled the stable except for Amos chewing hay. "I saw my name," he said. Clara sat up slowly, his coat gathered around her. "Then you should know why I came here." Ethan turned. Clara held the satchel against her chest. Her eyes were frightened again, but this time she did not look toward the road. She looked only at him. "Not tonight," Ethan said. "You're tired." "Mr. Walker, tomorrow." He opened the stable door. Cold air slipped inside, but the lantern continued burning steadily behind him. "Nothing in that bag needs to be heavier tonight than it already is." Clara stared at him for a long moment. Then her grip on the satchel loosened. Ethan stepped outside and pulled the door nearly shut, leaving a narrow opening for air. Before walking back to his empty farmhouse, he heard Clara settle beneath the blankets. For the first time since she had arrived, she did not ask whether she was allowed to stay. Clara was awake before sunrise. Ethan knew because when he stepped from the farmhouse carrying 2 cups of coffee, a thin line of lantern light already showed beneath the stable door. He found her beside Amos with her sleeves rolled above her wrists, working a brush through the gelding's winter coat. His heavy coat hung over the stall rail. He let you do his left side, Ethan said. Clara glanced at the horse. You lied about him. Exaggerated. That's a polite word for it. Ethan handed her a cup. She hesitated only a moment before taking it. Yesterday she had questioned every kindness. This morning, she wrapped both hands around the tin cup and let its warmth settle into her fingers. Thank you. Ethan leaned against the stall. Sleep? Some. Neither mentioned the letter. Not yet. Outside, dawn spread pale gold across the eastern pasture. Ethan carried feed while Clara finished brushing Amos, then followed him toward the chicken coop without being asked. By breakfast, she had collected eggs, swept the stable aisle, and repaired a loose strap on an old bridle with surprisingly practiced hands. You've worked around horses, Ethan said. Clara kept her eyes on the leather. My father had 3. Rancher? No. Carpenter. She pulled the stitch tight. He said a man who builds houses ought to know how to get home from one. Ethan almost smiled. It was the first piece of her past she had offered freely, so he did not reach for another. They ate breakfast in the kitchen. Clara stopped when she saw the table. 2 plates, 2 cups, 2 chairs pulled out. Ethan noticed her looking. Habit, he said, though it wasn't. For 11 years, only 1 chair had been used. Clara sat carefully, as if the invitation might disappear if she moved too quickly. She ate eggs and biscuits while Ethan studied the cracked handle of his coffee cup. The silence between them was different from the silence he knew. His had always felt like an empty room. This one had breathing in it. After breakfast, Clara stood immediately. What needs doing? You don't owe me a day's labor. I know. She met his eyes. What needs doing? Ethan nodded toward the north pasture. Fence took damage last month. They worked until noon. Ethan replaced 2 posts while Clara carried nails and held rails steady. She did not complain about the cold or the blisters forming beneath her gloves. When he told her to rest, she ignored him. When she struggled with a stubborn length of wire, he reached for it. I can do it. Ethan withdrew his hand. All right. Clara wrestled with the wire another 30 seconds before finally looking at him. You could help now. He took the pliers without comment. That earned him another reluctant smile. At noon, they sat on an overturned trough and shared bread, cheese, and coffee from a flask. Amos grazed nearby. Clara watched the distant cottonwoods moving in the wind. My husband used to hate quiet, she said suddenly. Ethan did not move. He'd whistle while he worked. Badly. Her thumb traced the rim of her cup. After he died, I thought silence would be easier. A gust moved across the field. Was it? Ethan asked. Clara looked toward the farmhouse. Smoke curled from its chimney into the blue. No, Ethan understood too well to offer comfort shaped like advice. He broke the remaining bread in half and gave her the larger piece. She noticed. She said nothing. On the walk back, Clara paused beside the repaired fence and ran her fingertips across the new cedar rail. It looks like it was never broken. Ethan shook his head. You can always tell where something's been mended. Her hand stopped. Is that bad? No. He looked at the line of new wood among the weathered posts. Means somebody thought it was worth fixing. Clara lowered her eyes. That evening, after supper, Ethan found her standing on the porch with the leather satchel in her hands. The sky had turned copper behind the barn. His coat was around her shoulders again. This time, she had put it on herself. Ethan. It was the first time she had used his given name. He stopped beside the door. Clara opened the brass clasp. My father died 6 weeks ago. She reached inside and removed the yellowed envelope he had glimpsed the night before. Before he died, he made me promise I would bring this to you. Ethan stared at his name written across the paper. Who was your father? Clara swallowed. Samuel Bennett. The porch seemed to go silent around him. Ethan knew that name. More than that, he knew the man. Clara extended the letter, but Ethan did not take it. Not yet. Samuel Bennett died 11 years ago, he said. Clara's face lost its color. No, she whispered. He didn't. For several seconds, neither of them moved. Clara still held the envelope between them, but Ethan's attention had shifted from the letter to her face. Samuel Bennett was my father, she said. He died in November. I buried him outside Cedar Falls. Ethan looked toward the darkening pasture. The Samuel Bennett I knew disappeared after the spring flood of '76. His wagon was found overturned near the Platte. He survived. Clara's voice softened. He just never came back. That hurt more than Ethan expected. Samuel had once worked beside him when the Walker Ranch was barely more than a cabin, a corral, and 80 acres of stubborn grass. He had eaten at Ethan's table. He had known Ethan's family. Then one morning, he was simply gone. Why? Ethan asked. Clara looked down at the envelope. He never told me everything. Near the end, he talked about this place. About you. He said he owed you a truth. She offered the letter again. This time Ethan took it. He turned it over once, thumb resting beneath the old wax seal, but did not break it. You walked 4 miles in winter to deliver this. I came farther than 4 miles. That wasn't my question. Clara's jaw tightened. It was the last thing my father asked of me. Ethan recognized the stubbornness. Samuel had possessed plenty of it. He slipped the letter into his shirt pocket. Then you kept your promise. Something flickered across Clara's face, relief mixed with exhaustion. You're not going to read it? Not tonight. You waited 11 years. Another night won't kill me. She stared at him as though patience were a language she had forgotten people could speak. The next morning, Ethan went to the north fence before breakfast. He needed work that required both hands and left little room for old ghosts. Frost silvered the grass. He was driving a replacement post when the rotten rail above him shifted. Clara shouted from behind. Ethan! He turned too late. The rail dropped, knocking him sideways. His palm caught a jagged nail as he fell. He landed hard on one knee. Clara was beside him almost immediately. Let me see. It's nothing. Blood ran between his fingers. Clara gave him a look that ended the argument. House. Now. Ethan raised an eyebrow. You always order ranchers around on their own land? Only the ones bleeding on it. 10 minutes later, he sat at the kitchen table while Clara washed his hand with boiled water. She worked carefully, brow drawn in concentration. Ethan flinched when she cleaned the deepest part of the cut. Sorry, you didn't put the nail there. Hold still anyway. He did. She wrapped his palm with clean cloth, then tied the bandage firmly. The simple intimacy of it unsettled him more than the injury. For years, when he was hurt, he had wrapped his own wounds. Clara finished and started gathering the basin. Ethan reached for it with his good hand. Leave it. You're injured. One hand still works. And mine both work. Their eyes met. Neither looked away. Finally, Ethan released the basin. Thank you. Clara carried it to the stove. That sounded painful. What? Letting somebody help you. Ethan almost laughed. Could say the same about you. Clara went still. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled. Fair enough. By afternoon, Ethan found her repairing the fence without him. She had dragged a rail into position and was struggling to hold it level while reaching for the hammer. He walked over. That's a 2-person job. Yesterday you said I didn't know you labor. You don't. He took one end of the rail with his uninjured hand. Doesn't mean you have to do everything alone. Clara studied him, then surrendered half the weight. Together they set the rail. One nail, then another. Neither hurried. When they finished, Clara rested her palm against the new wood. Worth fixing? She asked. Ethan remembered their conversation from the day before. Most things are. That evening, Clara cooked supper while Ethan awkwardly sliced bread one-handed. She placed 2 bowls on the table without asking where she should sit. Afterward, Ethan stepped onto the porch. The old letter waited in his pocket. Clara joined him carrying 2 cups of coffee and handed him one. The lamp behind them cast warm light through the kitchen window. Ethan drew out Samuel's envelope. Think it's time, he said. Clara did not move closer. She simply stayed beside him while he broke the seal. Inside was a single folded sheet and something small wrapped in cloth. Ethan unfolded the paper. His eyes stopped on the first line. Clara saw the color drain from his face. What does it say? Ethan stared at Samuel Bennett's handwriting, then slowly looked toward the locked bedroom window at the far end of his house. It says, he whispered, your father knew what happened the night my wife died. Clara did not ask him to continue. She stood beside Ethan beneath the porch lamp, both hands wrapped around her coffee cup while the wind moved softly through the cottonwoods. The letter trembled once in Ethan's bandaged hand. Then he began reading again. Samuel's words were plain. 11 years earlier, on the night Ethan's wife, Margaret, died, Samuel had been returning from town when he saw her wagon near the flooded creek crossing. Margaret had been trying to reach the doctor after Ethan was thrown from a horse and left feverish at home. Samuel had warned her that the bridge was unsafe. She had gone anyway. He followed, but the current took the wagon before he could reach her. Samuel survived the flood downstream. Margaret did not. Ethan stopped reading. For 11 years, he had carried one memory like a stone. Margaret leaving the ranch because he needed help. If he had not been hurt, she would never have taken that road. The letter offered no miracle that could change that. It only placed another man beside the grief. Samuel had blamed himself too. He wrote that he couldn't face you, Clara said quietly. Ethan folded the paper. So he let me think he was dead. He was ashamed. That doesn't make 11 years disappear. No, Clara did not defend her father further. That mattered. She simply stood beside Ethan while anger and grief moved through him without trying to name either one. At last he opened the small cloth bundle that had been tucked inside the envelope. A silver thimble rested in his palm. Ethan stopped breathing for a moment. Margaret's initials, M.W., were scratched into its side. He found it caught in the wagon seat, Clara said. Ethan closed his fingers around it. He kept this all those years. Beside his bed, Ethan turned toward the house. At the end of the hall waited the bedroom he had kept locked since Margaret's death. Clara remained on the porch. She did not follow. A few minutes later, Ethan returned carrying a small wooden box. He sat on the porch step and placed the thimble inside beside a faded ribbon, a dried sprig of lavender, and a photograph with worn corners. Clara lowered herself onto the step beside him, leaving enough space that he could choose whether to close it. He didn't. She sewed everything, Ethan said. Curtains, shirts, saddle blankets she had no business trying to make. Clara looked at the thimble. Were they good? Terrible. A surprised laugh escaped her. Ethan's mouth lifted at one corner. She'd have argued with me about that. They sat until their coffee went cold. The next morning, Clara moved her few belongings from the stable to the small room across from the kitchen. Ethan did not suggest it. He simply opened the door, set fresh sheets on the bed, and placed a lantern on the washstand. You don't have to stay in here, he said. Stable's still yours if Amos hasn't thrown you out. Clara ran her fingers across the quilt. How much? For what? The room. Ethan considered her. Breakfast. She frowned. Breakfast. You cook. I wash the dishes. That isn't rent. Best offer you're getting. She looked toward the kitchen and then back at him. All right. A routine formed without either of them naming it. Clara rose early and made biscuits while Ethan fed the horses. He left coffee warming on the stove when she slept late. She learned where he kept nails, flour, lamp oil, and clean towels. Ethan stopped explaining which cupboard held the plates. At supper, neither waited for permission before taking the chair they had begun to consider theirs. One evening, Clara entered the kitchen carrying Ethan's heavy coat. She had brushed the dust from it and repaired a tear near the cuff. You keep fixing things that aren't yours, Ethan said. Clara hung it beside his hat. So do you. Their eyes met. The quiet that followed no longer needed filling. Later, Ethan returned from checking the stable and found a second lamp burning in the front window. Clara sat at the table, sewing beneath its light. His coat hung by the door beside her faded shawl. 2 cups waited near the stove. Ethan paused with his hand on the latch. For years, smoke from the chimney had meant only that he had remembered to build a fire. A lamp meant he had remembered to light one. Tonight, for the first time in 11 years, the light in the window meant someone knew he was still outside. Clara looked up. Coffee's hot. Ethan removed his hat and hung it beside her shawl. You didn't have to wait. I know. She returned to her sewing. Ethan poured the coffee and sat across from her. Neither said anything more. But before going to bed, Clara left her cup beside his in the drying rack instead of carrying it back to her room. And Ethan, passing through the dark kitchen later, saw the 2 cups together and left them exactly where they were. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning. Clara saw Ethan returning from the road with the mail tucked beneath his arm, his hat pulled low against the wind. By then, she had been at the Walker Ranch nearly 3 weeks. Long enough that she no longer asked before adding wood to the stove. Long enough that Ethan automatically filled 2 coffee cups each morning. Long enough that Amos came to the stable door whenever he heard her footsteps. Ethan placed the envelopes beside her breakfast plate. One's yours. Clara wiped flour from her fingers and recognized the handwriting immediately. Mrs. Cooper, the boarding house keeper in town. She opened it standing beside the stove. The railroad hotel in Cheyenne needed a seamstress. Mrs. Cooper had shown the manager Clara's repaired traveling dress when he passed through town. The position included wages, meals, and a room. They wanted an answer within a week. Clara read the letter twice. Something wrong? Ethan asked. No, she folded it. That might be the problem. Ethan waited. There's work in Cheyenne. His hand paused around his coffee cup. Good work. Steady. Then that's good news. Clara looked at him, searching for something else. Yes. Ethan nodded and carried his cup toward the porch. You should take it if you want it. The door closed behind him. Clara remained beside the stove with the letter in her hand. She had expected no promise from Ethan. No declaration. Still, his easy acceptance landed strangely. For 3 weeks, this ranch had been teaching her the shape of belonging through ordinary things. A lantern left burning, dry gloves beside the stove, her chair already pulled from the table. Yet one sentence had reminded her that none of those things were promises. By afternoon, she had packed the few belongings from her carpet bag. Ethan saw it when he came inside. He stopped in her doorway. Train isn't until Friday. I know. You decided? Clara folded a blouse. You said I should take it. I said if you want it. What difference does that make? Ethan leaned against the doorframe. Quite a bit. She turned toward him. I can't build a life around guessing what people mean, Ethan. His expression tightened. Neither can I. The silence between them changed. For the first time, it felt sharp. Clara looked away. I've depended on people before. I didn't ask you to depend on me. Exactly. Ethan absorbed that without answering. He stepped back from the doorway. Supper at 6. I may not be hungry. Food'll be there anyway. That evening, only one chair was occupied. Ethan ate alone while Clara remained in her room. He did not knock. Clara sat on the edge of her bed listening to the scrape of his fork against the plate, angry that part of her wanted him to. The next morning, Ethan saddled Amos before sunrise. Clara found him tightening the cinch one-handed, the cut on his palm still not fully healed. Where are you going? Town. Why? Need supplies. She saw the folded paper protruding from his coat pocket. Her job letter. You took my letter. Borrowed it. Ethan. Mrs. Cooper wrote the hotel manager's name on it. Figured I'd send a wire confirming the position before you travel 200 miles for something that may not still exist. Clara stared at him. You're helping me leave. Ethan looked at the saddle buckle instead of her. I'm making sure nobody takes advantage of you. Why? His hand stopped. Because staying here shouldn't be something you choose because you're afraid to go somewhere else. Clara's anger faltered. Ethan finally met her eyes. If you stay, Clara, I want it to be because you had another road and chose this one. He mounted and rode toward town before she could answer. Snow began near noon. By 3, the road had vanished beneath white. Clara stood at the kitchen window, watching the ridge. She added wood to the stove, then another piece. At dusk, she lit the porch lamp. Supper remained covered beside the fire. 7 o'clock passed. Then 8. No hoofbeats. Clara put on Ethan's heavy coat and stepped onto the porch. The wind drove snow against her face. She could barely see the stable. Amos's stall stood empty. At 9, she heard something beyond the gate. Not hoofbeats. A man's uneven footsteps. Clara seized the lantern and ran into the snow. Ethan appeared through the darkness, leading Amos, one arm pressed against his ribs. Blood darkened the side of his shirt. Ethan. She reached him as his knees nearly gave way. Horse slipped near the creek, he managed. Clara pulled his arm across her shoulders. Why didn't you stay in town? Ethan looked toward the lamp burning in the farmhouse window. His face was pale with pain. Thought somebody might be waiting. Clara tightened her grip around him. The packed carpet bag remained beside her bed. But as she helped him toward the light, for the first time since Mrs. Cooper's letter arrived, Clara stopped thinking about Friday's train. Don't you dare fall asleep. Clara's voice shook as she pushed open the farmhouse door with her shoulder. Ethan tried to answer, but the movement pulled at his ribs and turned the words into a breathless grunt. Snow clung to his hair and shoulders. Clara got him to the kitchen table, then knelt beside him and carefully opened his coat. The blood looked worse than the wound. A broken branch had torn through his shirt and cut a long line beneath his ribs, but nothing appeared deeply punctured. I need the doctor. Clara stood. Ethan caught her wrist. Road's gone. Then I'll ride. No, his grip was weak but stubborn. You won't make a mile in this. Clara looked toward the window. Snow erased everything beyond the porch lamp. She pulled her wrist free. Then you're going to sit there and let me help you. Ethan leaned back. Yes, ma'am. She almost laughed. Almost. Instead, she boiled water, found clean cloth, and cut away the torn fabric of his shirt. Her hands trembled once when she saw the wound. Then they steadied. Ethan watched her thread a needle. Your father teach you that too? My husband. The answer quieted the room. Clara cleaned the cut. His name was Daniel. Ethan remained still. He worked freight wagons between Omaha and Cheyenne. One winter, his wagon overturned. He survived the accident. She drew the needle through Ethan's skin. He clenched his jaw. Infection took him 6 days later. Clara swallowed. I sat beside him every one of them. Ethan looked at her hands and finally understood why she had been so frightened when he appeared. Through the snow. Clara, don't. She tied the stitch. Not until I finish. When the wound was closed and wrapped, she sat across from him. The fire cracked behind them. After Daniel died, everybody wanted to decide what came next, she said. His brother offered me a room. My aunt wanted me in St. Louis. Father wanted me to stay with him. They were kind people. Her fingers tightened around the blood-stained cloth. But every kindness felt like another place I might lose. Ethan said nothing. So I learned not to stay anywhere long enough to need it. Clara looked toward the hall where her packed carpet bag waited. When Father died, there was nobody left to run from except myself. Ethan lowered his eyes. I know something about that. He reached into his coat, pulled out a folded telegram, and placed it on the table. Hotel position is real. Manager says they'll hold it until next Monday because of the storm. Clara stared at the paper. You rode into town for this. And nails. She looked at him. Ethan. Mostly this. A tear slipped down Clara's cheek. She wiped it away almost angrily. You nearly killed yourself helping me leave. No, Ethan's voice was quiet. I nearly got myself killed because Amos has more sense on ice than I do. That brought a broken laugh from her. Then he became serious. I wanted you to know you had a choice. Clara looked at the telegram again. Margaret had a choice too, Ethan continued. That night 11 years ago, I begged her not to go for the doctor. His thumb rubbed slowly across his bandaged palm. For years I told myself she died because of me. Then Samuel's letter came, and I realized something worse. What? I'd spent 11 years turning her last act of love into a punishment. Clara's eyes lifted. Ethan looked toward the locked bedroom at the end of the hall. She chose to help me. Samuel chose to follow her. Neither choice ended the way they wanted. But I made their choices about my guilt instead of their kindness. The fire settled lower. Clara reached across the table and placed her hand over his. Ethan did not move away. Neither did she. My father carried the same guilt, Clara whispered. I think that's why he sent me here. Ethan turned his hand beneath hers until their palms met. No declaration followed. None was needed. Outside, the storm continued. Inside, two people who had spent years refusing to need anyone sat together until the coffee went cold. Near dawn, Ethan woke in the chair to find a blanket over his shoulders. Clara stood at the stove preparing fresh coffee. Her packed carpet bag had been moved from the hallway. Ethan noticed its absence but did not ask about it. Clara brought him a cup, then placed something else on the table, the brass key to the stable he had given her days earlier. Ethan looked at it. Leaving it, Clara shook her head. She pushed it back toward him. I don't want a key to the stable anymore. Ethan's expression went still. Clara met his eyes. If I'm going to stay through the storm, I'd rather have a key to the house. For the first time since Clara had arrived, Ethan had no answer ready. He looked at the stable key between them, then at the woman standing beside the stove in his oversized coat, her hair loose from a sleepless night and flour from breakfast already dusting one sleeve. Through the storm? He asked. Clara understood the question beneath the question. That's all I can promise this morning. Ethan nodded. Then that's enough. He pushed himself carefully from the chair, crossed to the small cabinet beside the pantry, and opened its top drawer. Inside lay spare harness buckles, 2 cartridges, a broken watch chain, and 3 old keys. Ethan chose the smallest. He returned and placed it on the table. Clara stared at it. Front door, he said. Back door too. Lock's the same. You're just giving it to me? You asked. Clara picked up the key. It was warm from his palm. What if I leave Monday? Ethan's gaze stayed steady. Then you leave Monday. And the key? Put it on the table. Clara closed her fingers around it. Ethan turned toward his coffee as though he had handed her nothing more important than a spoon. That was what nearly undid her. No bargain, no debt, no promise extracted in return. Just a door she no longer needed permission to open. The storm lasted another day. Ethan's ribs forced him into the unfamiliar position of accepting help. Clara fed Amos, carried wood, and checked the north fence while Ethan stood on the porch pretending not to worry. "You're limping," he called when she returned. "I'm walking through snow." "Looks like limping. Go inside." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You're getting comfortable giving orders." Clara brushed snow from his coat, the same heavy coat she now wore more often than he did. Someone has to. By Sunday, sunlight returned. Snowmelt dripped from the eaves, and the world beyond the ranch glittered beneath a clean blue sky. Ethan was strong enough to walk to the stable. Clara found him there replacing the leather strap she had repaired weeks earlier. "You'll tear those stitches." "Doctor said light work." "Doctor also said you're stubborn." "Pretty sure that was personal." Clara leaned against the stall while Amos nosed her shoulder. For a while, they worked without speaking. Then Ethan said, "Tomorrow's Monday." Her hand stopped on Amos's mane. "I know. Road should be open." "I know that too." Ethan set the bridle down. "I'm not going to ask you to stay." Clara looked at him. Something inside her tightened, but before she could turn away, he continued, "And I'm not going to tell you to go." He walked to the stable door and looked across the yard toward the farmhouse. "I spent too many years thinking loving somebody meant being responsible for what happened to them." He glanced back. "It doesn't." Clara said nothing. "If you take that train, I'll drive you to the station." Ethan's voice remained calm. "If you stay, there'll be coffee in the morning." Clara swallowed. "That's simple." No, his eyes softened. "But it can start simple." The following morning, Ethan harnessed the wagon before sunrise. Clara's carpetbag waited on the porch. Neither spoke as he loaded it behind the seat. The drive into town took nearly an hour through melting snow. At the station, steam rolled beneath the locomotive while passengers moved along the platform. Ethan carried Clara's bag to the bench. "Cheyenne train leaves in 10 minutes. The station master called." Clara held the house key inside her glove. Ethan tipped his hat. "You'll do well." "There." She searched his face. "You really believe that?" "Wouldn't have ridden through a snowstorm for a telegram if I didn't." Clara laughed softly, but her eyes shone. The conductor called for boarding. Ethan stepped backward. He would not make her choice harder by asking for something she had not freely offered. Clara picked up her carpetbag. She walked 3 steps toward the train, then stopped. Around her, boots struck wooden boards, doors slammed, steam hissed. She looked down at the key in her palm. For years, every road had meant escape. This was the first one that offered her somewhere to go, and still left somewhere behind where a lamp would be burning. Clara turned. Ethan had not moved. "You said there'd be coffee if I stayed." His expression barely changed, but his breath caught visibly in the cold. "I did." Clara walked back and handed him the carpetbag. "Then you'd better buy more coffee." Ethan took it. No embrace. No grand promise. Just a quiet smile that reached his eyes for the first time since she had known him. On the ride home, Clara sat beside him instead of across from him. When the farmhouse appeared beyond the cottonwoods, smoke rising from its chimney, she reached into her pocket and touched the key. Ethan noticed, but said nothing. At the porch, he carried her bag inside. Clara followed without knocking. She hung her shawl beside his hat, placed the key in her pocket instead of on the table, and went to put water on for coffee. Spring came slowly to the Walker Ranch. First the snow disappeared from the south pasture. Then the creek loosened beneath its skin of ice. By April, small yellow flowers had begun pushing through the grass beside the stable gate, where Clara had once stood shivering in a dress too thin for winter. She stopped there one morning with a basket of laundry on her hip. Ethan was repairing the gate hinge. "You know," she said, "that gate has needed an unreasonable amount of attention." Ethan tightened a bolt. "Gets used more now." Clara smiled and continued toward the clothesline. For months had passed since she stepped away from the train. Nothing miraculous followed. There were fences to mend, horses to feed, bread that sometimes burned, and mornings when old grief returned without warning. Clara occasionally woke reaching toward the empty side of a bed that had belonged to another life. Ethan still sometimes stood outside Margaret's old room without entering. Healing had not erased either of their dead. It had simply taught the living how to keep moving without leaving love behind. In March, Ethan finally unlocked Margaret's room. He did it alone. Clara was kneading bread when he carried a wooden box into the kitchen and placed it on the table. Inside were Margaret's ribbons, photographs, Samuel Bennett's letter, and the silver thimble. "Thought I might make that room useful again," he said. Clara wiped flour from her hands. "What were you thinking?" "Sewing room." He glanced at the half-mended shirts stacked beside her. "Unless you'd rather keep covering my kitchen table with thread." "Your kitchen table?" Ethan considered that. "Our kitchen table." Clara said nothing, but the bread dough received considerably more kneading than it needed. By May, sunlight filled the old room. Clara's sewing machine stood beneath the window, and women from neighboring ranches began bringing dresses and shirts for repair. Ethan built shelves along one wall. He never removed Margaret's small wooden box. Clara never asked him to. Some memories did not need to disappear for a room to belong to the present. One evening after supper, Ethan found Clara on the porch repairing the cuff of his heavy winter coat. "Again?" he asked. "You're hard on clothes." "Ranching. Carelessness." He sat beside her. 2 cups of coffee rested between their chairs. Beyond the fence, Amos grazed beneath a sky turning orange and violet. Ethan watched Clara pull the needle through the wool. "You know you don't need that coat anymore." "I know. Weather's 70 degrees. I'm aware." "Then why are you fixing it?" Clara tied the thread and looked at him. "Because some things are worth fixing even after you don't need them." Ethan remembered a broken fence in winter and a woman asking the same question. He reached across the space between their chairs and held out his hand. Clara looked at it. Months earlier, she might have wondered what accepting it would cost. Now she simply placed her hand in his. They sat that way while daylight faded. "Clara, I don't know much about saying things properly." "I had noticed." Ethan looked down at their joined hands. "I spent 11 years believing an empty house was easier than losing somebody again." Clara waited. "Then you showed up at my gate and started arguing about blankets. You lied about your horse." "That too." His thumb moved once across her knuckles. "I don't want you here because you need somewhere to stay." Clara's breath slowed. Ethan looked at her. "I want you here because when you're gone, I notice." No grand declaration followed. Clara did not need one. "Good," she said softly. "Because I noticed too." Ethan leaned toward her slowly enough that she could turn away. She didn't. Their first kiss was brief and quiet, carrying none of the urgency of strangers trying to fill empty places. When they separated, Clara rested her forehead against his. Somewhere in the stable, Amos kicked his stall. Clara laughed. Ethan did too. By late summer, there were 2 pairs of boots beside the kitchen door. 2 hats hung from the pegs. Clara's house key had acquired a smooth place along one edge from daily use. On Sundays, neighbors sometimes stayed for supper, and an extra chair remained near the wall for whoever happened to need it. Samuel's letter stayed in the wooden box beside Margaret's thimble, not hidden, not forgotten, simply part of what had brought them here. One September morning, Clara carried 2 cups of coffee onto the porch. Ethan stood at the fence watching sunrise spill gold across the pasture. His heavy coat hung over the porch rail, freshly mended though winter was still months away. Clara handed him a cup. Ethan looked toward the stable gate. "Cold morning." "Not particularly." "Need my coat." Clara followed his gaze and smiled. "Not anymore." She slipped her hand into his. Behind them, sunlight filled the kitchen window. Smoke curled gently from the chimney. Amos waited at the stable, and the old gate stood open toward the road. Clara looked at the house, then at Ethan. Once, she had arrived asking only for one night in a stable. Now there was coffee waiting, a key in her pocket, and someone beside her who never asked her to earn the right to remain. Ethan squeezed her hand. "Ready?" Clara looked toward the brightening fields. "For what?" He nodded toward home. "Breakfast." Together they crossed the yard, leaving the gate open behind them.